The diplomatic quarters aboard the Zenith Accord hummed with the low thrum of recycled air and distant engine noise. Myra Vance sat cross-legged on the observation deck floor, her datapad forgotten beside her as she watched the swirling nebula beyond the reinforced viewport. The colors, violet bleeding into amber, streaked with silver, never failed to mesmerize her. Even after 3 months stationed on this floating monument to interspecies cooperation, a chittering sound broke her reverie. Myra turned to find Corin peering around the doorframe, his large amber eyes reflecting the nebula's glow. The young Vrecken was barely 4 solar cycles old, still gangly and uncertain in his movements, his russet fur patchy where his adult coat hadn't fully grown in. His species' apex predators from a high-gravity world where evolution had carved them into perfect hunters rarely showed vulnerability. But Corin was still a cub, and curiosity consistently overpowered his instinctive caution. "You're supposed to be in xenobiology lessons," Myra said, though she couldn't suppress her smile. Corin's ear tufts flattened against his skull, the Vrecken equivalent of a guilty shrug. He patted closer on 4 powerful limbs, each paw the size of Myra's head, claws retracted but still visible. To most humans, his approach would trigger every prey species alarm evolution had hardwired into their brainstems. Myra had felt that terror once, during her first week aboard. Now she just saw a curious child. "Ambassador Corin's sire said I could have a break," the cub replied in heavily accented but functional galactic common. His translator implant still struggled with human phonetics, rendering his speech with an odd musical quality. "I wanted to see the colors again." "Liar," Myra said affectionately. "You wanted to see if I had any more of those chocolate rations." Corin's long tail swept the floor in what might have been embarrassment or amusement. Myra still couldn't always tell. "Maybe both things are true." She laughed and reached into her jacket pocket, producing a small foil-wrapped square. The Vrecken cub's eyes widened, his pupils dilating to nearly eclipse the amber irises. In one fluid motion he'd crossed the distance between them, though he stopped just short of invading her personal space. That, at least, was a lesson he'd learned well. "Sit," Myra instructed, and Corin promptly dropped into a sitting position that would have looked more natural on a large cat than on a sentient being who'd one day command starships. She tossed the chocolate. He caught it mid-air with reflexes that made human athletes look sluggish. While Corin carefully unwrapped his prize, his claws surprisingly dexterous despite their lethality, Myra retrieved her glasses from where she'd set them beside the datapad. She'd removed them to rub her tired eyes and now slipped them back on, the world sharpening into focus. Corin watched this ritual with intense fascination, chocolate temporarily forgotten. "What do those do?" he asked. "It wasn't the first time." "They help me see better," Myra explained, also not for the first time. "Human eyes aren't perfect. Sometimes the focusing mechanisms don't work quite right, so we need corrective lenses. Your species makes tools for broken eyes instead of fixing the eyes." Corin's tone suggested he found this both baffling and somehow endearing. "Well, we can fix them permanently with surgery, but glasses are easier, less invasive." She removed them again, holding them up so the nebula light refracted through the lenses. "Plus, I like how they look." Corin tilted his head, a gesture universal among species with necks. "Can I try?" Myra hesitated. Vrecken facial structure was different, elongated snout, eyes set more laterally for predators' peripheral vision, ear positioning that would make standard frames impossible. But Corin's pleading expression, so much like a human child's, despite the fearsome teeth and alien features, melted her reservation. "Sure, but they probably won't fit right." She handed over the glasses, and Corin took them with surprising gentleness, manipulating them with the pads of his paws rather than his claws. He studied the frames with scientific intensity, turning them over, holding them to the light, examining the hinges and nose bridge. Then, with careful deliberation, he attempted to put them on. The result was objectively ridiculous. The frame sat askew on his snout, one arm hooked over an ear tuft while the other dangled free. The lenses covered nothing useful, one pressed against the side of his nose, the other jutting out at an angle that pointed toward his whiskers. Corin couldn't possibly see through them in any meaningful way. He looked up at Myra with an expression of utmost seriousness. How do I look? Myra felt laughter bubbling up from her chest, warm and genuine, the kind that came from pure joy rather than mockery. But she also saw the earnestness in Corin's eyes, the way he held himself a bit straighter, trying to embody whatever he thought wearing glasses meant. You look wiser already, she said, managing to keep her voice steady and sincere. Corin's tail began to swish in rapid, delighted patterns. Truly, absolutely, very scholarly, very distinguished. She made a show of studying him critically. I'd say you're ready to teach xenobiology instead of attending the lessons. The cub made a purring sound deep in his chest laughter. Myra had learned, though it sounded nothing like human mirth. He carefully removed the glasses and handed them back with both paws, as if returning a precious artifact. Your species is strange, Corin announced. You make tools for everything. For seeing, for reaching, for thinking. He gestured at the datapad. You're small and soft, and your eyes don't work, and you move slow, but you make tools that let you do anything. That's the human advantage, Myra agreed, settling the glasses back on her nose. We're not the strongest or the fastest. We can't see in the dark like Vreckens, or breathe underwater like Quilathi, or survive in vacuum like Crystalline Collective. But we're really, really good at making things that let us do all of that anyway. Is that why the Council respects your species? Corin asked, suddenly serious. Even though you're prey? The question hung in the air. Myra knew that Vrecken culture struggled with humanity's position in galactic society. To a species whose entire worldview was built on predator-prey dynamics, humans defied easy categorization. They had no natural weapons, no protective armor, no intimidating size. Yet they'd reached the stars through sheer persistence and innovation. Maybe, Myra said thoughtfully. Or maybe it's because we don't think in terms of predator and prey. We just think in terms of problems and solutions. Corin considered this, his young mind working through concepts that challenged his cultural programming. Finally, he reached out and gently tapped the chocolate wrapper still clutched in his paw. Can I have another one? Myra laughed, the philosophical moment broken. Nice try. One per visit, remember? The cub's ears drooped in exaggerated disappointment, but his eyes sparkled with good humor. He rose to his feet, stretching in a way that reminded Myra of every cat she'd ever known, then padded toward the door. Corin, Myra called after him. He paused, looking back. You really do look wiser? Not because of the glasses, but because you ask good questions. The young Vrecken's tail swept once in what Myra had learned to recognize as pleasure or pride. Then he was gone, chittering echoing down the corridor as he presumably returned to his neglected lessons. Myra returned her attention to the nebula, but her smile remained. In a universe of predators and prey, of natural hierarchies and instinctive divisions, maybe humanity's greatest tool wasn't technology at all. Maybe it was simply the ability to see wisdom in a curious child, regardless of how many teeth they had.